My name is Haley Monroe. I'm 28 years old, and this morning an envelope ruined my tea. It came in a standard cream-colored sleeve, the kind people use when they want something to look both official and personal. The sender's return address read McAdams and Kelser, estate attorneys. No handwritten note, just a single page inside neatly typed, signed with a name I hadn't seen in 4 years, my mother's. The letter said they were finalizing the sale of the Elm Creek property, that it would be helpful if I could provide a written acknowledgement of the sale for the title transfer, that my signature would ensure there are no delays. A paragraph later, it assured me that everything was already taken care of, and this was just a formality. Formality? I folded the letter once, then twice, and set it on the kitchen counter beside my untouched tea. The Elm Creek house wasn't just any house. It was the only thing my father ever truly left behind, the house where he taught me how to change a tire and decode Sudoku puzzles, where he set up a tent in the backyard one night and told me stories until I fell asleep with a flashlight in my hand, the house he swore would always be mine when the time comes. The time never came because he passed before his heart gave him the chance to rewrite the will, but he told everyone, my aunts, his co-workers, the neighbor who used to bring over rhubarb pie. "It's for Haley," he said. "That house will always be hers." Until my mother decided it wasn't. I sat down at my desk in the back room of my small apartment, the one tucked above the shuttered bakery in East View just outside Milwaukee. From the window, I could see the flat gray sky pressing against the roofline of the closed shop below. I glanced at the half-finished spreadsheet still open on my screen, the one labeled Family Transfers. Color-coded columns, dates, notes, wire transfers, repayments that never came. And to the right near the bottom of the screen, a simple file path. A USB with that exact name sat in the drawer to my right. Labeled in black permanent marker just like everything else in my world, because I'm the kind of person who labels who saves things, others throw away who doesn't forget. I opened the drawer and ran my finger along the rows of memory sticks. The medical expenses one, the tuition promises one, the older one labeled Power of Attorney. That was the last time I saw my mother's handwriting in person. 4 years ago, at her kitchen table, she'd placed a stack of documents in front of me and said, "It's just temporary, honey. Until I get back on my feet, you're the only one I trust." I remember the weight of the pen in my hand, the way the heat from her coffee cup reached my fingers, but not my heart. I remember asking twice, "This is just for utilities, right?" And her nodding quickly, already reaching for the papers before the ink dried. And I remember the phone call 3 months later when I found out the power of attorney had been extended permanently, that I'd technically agreed to let her control the Elm Creek estate along with my portion of Dad's pension. All through a form I never saw, but I kept a scanned copy I always did. I walked to the shelf across the room and pulled down my lockbox. The metal was cool under my fingertips. I clicked it open and lifted out the folder marked Inheritance Plus, Legal. Dad inside were records my mother probably assumed I tossed out years ago. Certified mail copies, escrow files, emails printed and highlighted, and tucked into the flap of the folder a notarized amendment to my father's earlier will, unsigned but time-stamped, stating his intent to leave the Elm Creek house to me. A draft, but one he filed. I sat back down and reached for my tea. It had gone cold. A breeze slipped through the narrow kitchen window. I watched the curtains shift faint and white like the years that had passed since my mother's last real attempt to speak to me. 4 years since the confrontation. 4 years since I'd looked her in the eye and said, "You don't get to rewrite this story." I clicked open a document from the USB titled Elm Creek Timeline. Final, a quiet timeline of quiet betrayals. The furnace repair I paid for. The months I covered the mortgage when she was between jobs, the insurance premiums that slipped through the cracks. A dozen entries all signed and dated, all from the 2 years after my father passed. The spreadsheet didn't have anger in it. It didn't scream or accuse. It just kept records. I read the letter again, the one she sent today, and looked for something she hadn't included. No apology. No, "How have you been?" Just an expectation sign, "This be useful, don't make it difficult." I looked at the USB drive again, then at the lockbox. then at the closed laptop screen, its faint reflection casting the softest shimmer across the table. I thought about the hundreds of quiet afternoons I'd spent combing through documents, not because I wanted revenge, but because I knew one day this would come back around. It always does. People forget what they say, they forget what they take. But I never forgot. My voice was soft in the silence as I whispered, "You thought I wouldn't remember." I reached for the envelope, slipped it back inside the folder, and laid it atop the lockbox. Tomorrow I'd call a lawyer, not because I wanted to fight, but because they finally asked me for something. And this time I had every receipt. Before everything shifted, my family was ordinary in the best ways. I remember Sunday pancakes, the smell of my dad's cologne as he left for work, and my mom singing to the radio while folding laundry. I was the oldest by 4 years, and for the first decade of my life, it felt like I belonged. My dad, Mark Monroe, wasn't loud or overly affectionate, but he noticed things. He'd tap the corners of my homework with his finger when he thought I could do better. He kept a journal of quotes he liked and used to read them to me before bed. He was the kind of person who could make you feel seen without saying much. When I got a perfect score on a spelling test in 3rd grade, he wrote a note on a post-it sharp as ever. I kept it taped to my desk for years. But when I was 13, everything changed. The diagnosis came in quietly, like bad weather that had already been circling. My dad had stage IV stomach cancer. I didn't understand what that meant, not fully, only that the house grew quieter. The calendar filled up with appointments. Our fridge turned into rows of Tupperware from neighbors, and our living room was rearranged to fit a hospital bed. After he died, I didn't cry the way I thought I would. I just sat beside his empty chair for hours, running my fingers over the cracked leather of his wristwatch. The strap had frayed at the edges. He used to joke it was well-earned damage. I kept that watch in my drawer for years, still ticking even after he was gone, unlike everything else. That was the year my mother changed. Not all at once, she didn't become cruel or distant, just different, tighter. Her smiles grew thinner, her voice more clipped. She began treating life like a checklist: bills, groceries, PTA meetings. And Drew, my younger brother, became the list's headline. He had asthma, mild but dramatic. He played baseball. He was lanky and awkward but charming in a way that made adults coo and ruffle his hair. Suddenly, everything revolved around his needs. I watched the slow reorientation of our family universe, and I adapted. I gave up my bedroom so Drew could have the bigger one to accommodate his equipment. My desk was moved to the hallway. When I asked if I could still sign up for art class, my mother told me there wasn't room in the schedule. Drew had pitching practice 4 nights a week, and someone needed to handle dinner. I didn't argue, I didn't cry. Instead, I stayed quiet. I said sure a lot. I learned to fill in the cracks without anyone noticing. At school, I was the kind of student teachers liked, but didn't worry about perfect attendance. Quiet, polite, I got straight A's. But no one clapped. I stopped trying to invite my mom to awards nights after the second one she missed. At home, Drew's achievements, however small, were celebrated like holidays. When he won Most Improved Player for his junior varsity team, we went out for dinner. When he passed his math class with a C+, Mom bought a banner that said, "Proud of you," and hung it in the kitchen. I had a shoebox of awards for academic excellence shoved in the back of my closet. I'd sometimes open it late at night just to remember that they existed. At 16, I got a part-time job at the public library. Not because I was asked to, but because it was the only way I could afford school supplies, snacks, and the occasional second-hand book. The first time I used my debit card to help pay for Drew's new cleats because Mom's card had a hold on it. She looked at me and said, "You're always so responsible, Haley. I don't know what I'd do without you." I smiled, I always did. But that night, I sat in the dark and looked at the receipt. I folded it neatly and tucked it into a folder labeled Things They Forgot. Drew didn't forget, though. He always said thank you, but he never offered to pay me back. By senior year, I'd learned how to make myself small in a room full of noise. I helped with dinner laundry rides. I never missed a bill payment. I never raised my voice. I became the wallpaper of our family, supportive, necessary, and ignored. When college application season came around, I didn't ask anyone for help. I knew what the answer would be. Drew needed SAT tutoring and money was tight, so I spent my lunch breaks researching scholarships. I downloaded forms at the library. I wrote essays in the margins of my notebooks and printed them late at night when no one could see. The FAFSA was my final test. One long bureaucratic form asking for data numbers. History things I'd memorized by necessity. I sat in the back of the community library, a broken pencil tucked behind my ear, typing everything into the online form like it was a math exam I couldn't afford to fail. At that same moment across town, Drew's graduation party was in full swing. A rented hall balloons, a DJ playing top 40 hits. I saw the photos on Facebook later. My mother posing with the cake, which read, "You make us proud." Drew, frosted in blue and gold. I paid for the cake. My debit card still bore the charge, $58 or $75 at the bakery downtown. I didn't go to the party. I wasn't invited. You'll understand, my mom had said, Drew really needs this moment. Let's not make it complicated. I didn't want to make it complicated. I just wanted to feel like I existed. I remember walking home that evening, FAFSA confirmation email in my inbox, a cold wind slicing down the sidewalk and thinking, if I vanished tomorrow, would anyone here even realize? But I also remember pausing halfway up the stairs to my apartment, gripping the railing and whispering, "You are not invisible. Not to yourself. Not to your future." By the time I turned 25, I had a solid job, a modest apartment, and a bank account that wasn't gasping for air. I worked as a junior data analyst at a firm in Milwaukee. Nothing glamorous, but enough to finally breathe without checking my balance every time I bought groceries. And that's when they came back around. It started with Drew. Of course it did. He called one evening while I was reorganizing my fridge, a half-eaten salad in one hand and my phone in the other. "Hey, H," he said, all casual charm. "I screwed up. I dropped out of school. But it's not as bad as it sounds." I waited. "I'm enrolling in a certification program, tech support. Only thing is I need someone to co-sign the loan. Just to help me get started again. I'll handle the payments, I swear." I should have said no. I knew I should have. But that voice, Drew's mix of sheepish guilt and easy confidence, still had the ability to crawl under my better judgment. I told myself I was just helping him up just one more push. I co-signed. 2 months later, I received the first delinquency notice. I called him. No answer. Just a voicemail. 2 days later, his voice breezy and rushed. "Hey, sorry, missed this month, but I'll get back on track next check. Can you spot me just this once?" That was the first time I heard that phrase. "Can you spot me?" It would echo through the next 2 years like a broken record. It wasn't long before my mother called too. She sounded tired. "It's just a rough patch, Haley. You know I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. The condo on Willow Bend is perfect. Small, accessible ground floor. But I can't pull the down payment together in time, and I don't want to lose it." She hesitated, then said, "You've always been the stable one." That sentence had teeth. I wired the money. Not a loan, not a discussion. Just a gift, that's what she called it in the thank you card. She sent hand-signed with a single word underlined in looping cursive, "grateful." The word hit like a bruise every time I reread it. After that, it became routine. Drew called to float more expenses. Car repair software for his course. A deposit on an apartment. My mother asked for help with HOA fees. Heating costs. A medical bill she wasn't sure insurance would cover. I helped. I always helped. Each time I logged it, I printed the transfer receipts. I filed them into the spreadsheet titled Family Transfers. I added a comment beside each one with the date and reason, a tiny, meticulous rebellion that no one knew about. Until I started asking about Elm Creek. It was innocent at first, just a question in passing during a Sunday call. "Is the house still in our names?" I asked. Dad's will had that clause about shared ownership, remember? There was a pause. I think so. My mother said why. "I just want to make sure we're covered," I replied. "It's been years. Taxes, legal stuff. I'd like to review it." Another pause. "It's nothing you need to worry about." But I did worry. I always had. And when people who owe you money start dodging basic questions, you pay attention. I emailed her twice after that. No reply. When I called, she picked up on the third try and told me she'd have to check with Drew. That was when I knew. Drew never once had a hand in managing the house. Not when Dad passed, not during the probate hearing, not when I sat with our lawyer and signed the temporary co-ownership agreement until we figured out the estate. Drew wasn't even there that day. He was in Orlando for a softball tournament. So why was he now the person to ask? I didn't press it that day, but the following weekend I called Aunt May. She was Dad's younger sister, never directly involved, but always observant. The one who sent me cards on my birthday even after everyone else forgot I hadn't spoken to her in months, but I called and asked, "Have you heard anything about the Elm Creek house?" Her voice tightened instantly. "Haley, I thought you knew." "Knew what?" "It's been refinanced," she said quietly, "under your mother and Drew's names. 6 months ago, I think." The line went silent on my end. "I only found out because your mom asked me to be a backup contact in case of title issues. She made it sound like the whole family had agreed." "I didn't speak, couldn't." "You didn't sign anything she asked." "No," I said slowly, "I didn't sign a thing." After the call ended, I sat in my apartment for almost an hour without moving. My tea had gone cold. Again. Then I stood up and walked to the closet. In the back, behind a stack of tax folders and archived invoices, sat a black fireproof lockbox. I placed it on the kitchen table, clicked open the latch, and pulled out a folder labeled in my handwriting, "Property Elm Creek." Inside were a dozen documents. The temporary co-ownership deed from the year after Dad passed. The certified appraisal we paid for together. Copies of property tax payments, half of which I'd covered to help. And finally, a copy of the original deed, one that had both my name and my mother's dated and notarized. I flipped to the back of the folder. Slipped into the sleeve was a form I didn't recognize. An amended deed, recent formal, and notarized without my name. I checked the date. 6 months ago. I stared at the page until the letters blurred. Then I flipped it over and checked the witness signature. It wasn't mine, but someone had tried to mimic my initials. The corner of my mouth twitched. I walked to the drawer and pulled out my phone. I replayed Drew's last voicemail, the one where he asked me to spot him again. His voice sounded so normal, so casual. I set the phone down and looked at the paperwork spread across the table. They hadn't just taken my money. They'd rewritten the record. I didn't scream. I didn't send angry texts or call to demand an explanation. Instead, I did what I had always done. I opened my records. At the far edge of my desk sat the USB-labeled receipts, HM in black permanent marker, a plain, unassuming object thin as a pencil, no larger than a stick of gum, but inside it held the unspoken history of the last 6 years. I plugged it in and opened the folder tree. Every category had its own home. Wire transfers, Drew Mom, down payment and maintenance text logs, screenshot archive audio memos, family calls. I scrolled. The spreadsheet of payments I'd kept was already robust, but this was the full skeleton dates notes. Bank IDs, corresponding screenshots. I hadn't set out to make a legal record. It was just how I processed the quiet injustice the way some people journal to stay sane. I cataloged. Not to remember, to prove I had never forgotten. There was one more thing I needed to check. Buried in an older subfolder titled Dad, Estate and Notes. I found it a low-resolution scan from 2011. It was the draft will. I'd saved it years ago from the lawyer's office archive, thinking it might come in handy if disputes ever arose. And there, about halfway down the second page, it was, "The Elm Creek property shall be held in trust under co-ownership by Marlene Monroe and Haley Monroe until Haley reaches the age of 25. Upon that date, sole discretion to retain sell or transfer shall belong to Haley Monroe alone. No transfer sale or refinancing may occur without her signed and verified consent." I stared at the line, rereading it like it might vanish if I blinked too hard. I was 28, and I had never signed over anything, which meant the refinancing, the deed transfer, the legal filings done without my approval. They weren't just immoral. They were fraudulent. I didn't move for a long time. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, my tea once again untouched. The apartment around me was silent, save for the hum of the radiator. Outside, a soft layer of snow had begun to settle along the windowsill. There was no fight in me, not in the way people expect. No fire, no raised voice. Just a stillness sharp enough to cut glass. That afternoon, I drove past the Elm Creek property. It had been almost 2 years since I'd last seen it in person. The hedges were trimmed, the shutters repainted. A newer car sat in the driveway, one I didn't recognize. The lawn sign for open house had been removed, but the house felt cold, distant. The gate was closed and the porch light was off. It used to be warm. I could still remember standing at the edge of the front walk in 4th grade, holding my dad's hand as he told me how the oak trees would shade the house in summer and protect it from wind in the fall. "This is your place, too. H," he'd said. "When you're older, it'll be yours." It already was, and now it wasn't. But what they didn't know, what they would never suspect, was that I'd kept every word he ever wrote, every clause he drafted, every clause he intended. I pulled out my phone and typed a name I hadn't used in years, David Penfield, my father's old estate attorney. He'd handled the original filings, quiet, methodical, maybe 70. Now I didn't know if he was still practicing, but I found his number online and called. The receptionist answered in a crisp tone. "Penfield and Brightwell. How may I direct your call?" "I'd like to request a consultation with Mr. Penfield," I said calmly. "It's about a will. Mark Monroe's will. I'm his daughter." Just a moment. A pause. Then hold music, gentle outdated jazz. 2 minutes later, a voice I half remembered came on the line. Haley. "Hi, Mr. Penfield. I'm not sure if you remember me." "Of course I do. Mark's daughter. You were just a teenager the last time I saw you in my office. I need to talk to you about the Elm Creek house." His tone changed instantly. I assumed this is about the refinancing. I paused. "You knew." "I had my suspicions I no longer represent your mother and haven't in years, but I received a records request a few months ago, one that raised red flags. I wasn't sure whether to contact you." "Well, I'm contacting you now," I said, "and I still have the scanned will, the amendment, the trust clause." He sounded relieved. "Then we should meet." We set a time for Friday morning. His office hadn't moved. Same brick building downtown with ivy crawling up the side and a squeaky elevator that never reached the 4th floor without pausing. I returned home and spent the evening printing everything. Not just the will, but every transfer, every voice memo I'd labeled request, unpaid, and every tax document tied to the Elm Creek address with my name still attached. The last thing I printed was a single screenshot, an email from my mother dated 2 years prior. The subject line read, "Thanks for covering the taxes again, sweetheart." The attachment was a property tax notice addressed to both of us. I highlighted the line, "Owners Haley Monroe and Marlene Monroe." That was the thing about legal ownership, it left footprints, and I had mapped every one of them. I tucked all the documents into a thick folder clipped tight and placed it next to the USB drive on the table. They thought I was quiet. They thought I had walked away. They thought silence meant surrender. But all it meant was I had been watching. The cease and desist letter went out on a Thursday morning, hand-delivered by my attorney. No dramatics, just quiet legal weight wrapped in a plain white envelope. By the time it landed on my mother's porch, the snow had already started falling. I watched the thick flakes settle against the dark window pane in my apartment, sipping tea that had long gone cold. Inside that letter was a single clear message: stop the sale of the Elm Creek house immediately. Any further action would result in legal consequences, real ones. But that wasn't the end of it. That evening, I took a deep breath, opened my laptop, and composed the message I had waited years to write. I wrote to my mother and my brother not out of emotion, but with the exact clarity they never expected from me. I told them I had full documentation of everything: the voice recordings of Drew asking for money, the long trail of bank transfers I made on their behalf, text messages from my mother thanking me for handling taxes, and most importantly, the estate clause for my father's will, the one they pretended didn't exist, the one that made it legally impossible for them to refinance or sell the house without my permission. I told them plainly that I knew about the forged signature, that the refinancing had been done behind my back, and that I had evidence. Then I gave them a deadline. Either they reversed all actions regarding the house, returned what they'd taken, and acknowledged what they'd done, or we would settle it in court. I didn't ask for a response. I expected silence. What I got the next morning was a phone call from David, my lawyer. His voice was calm, but there was a note of satisfaction in it. They pulled the house listing. He said, "The real estate agent dropped the deal as soon as they received the letter." I nodded quietly. Any word from them? David hesitated. "Not directly, but check your inbox." I opened my email. Sitting near the top was a message not from my mother or brother, but from someone with a law firm's name. It was a settlement offer. They wanted to resolve everything privately. They offered to return a portion of the money from the refinancing and formally remove their names from the property. In return, they asked me to drop any legal action and sign a document promising not to speak about it again. It was exactly what I expected, a polite way of saying, "Let's make this disappear." I opened the offer, read every line, then closed it. Then I said no. Not because I needed the money, not because I wanted revenge, but because the truth isn't something you negotiate into silence. I wrote back simply that I would not accept any deal that required me to pretend this hadn't happened, that what they did wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a betrayal, deliberate and calculated, and I wasn't going to help them cover it up. 2 days later, a plain envelope showed up in my mailbox. No name on the return address. Inside was a check. It matched the first amount listed in their proposal. No letter, no explanation, just money. I stared at it for a long moment, then slipped it back into a new envelope and returned it. I didn't include a note, only a sticky tab that read, "You still think this is about money." That was the last time they tried to reach out. There was no apology, no confrontation, just silence. But this time the silence didn't belong to me. It belonged to them. David finalized the filings. Within a few weeks, the deed was corrected. My name was reinstated on the Elm Creek property. The title company flagged the previous transaction as potentially fraudulent and launched an internal review. No lawsuits followed, no lawsuits needed. I never showed up at their door, never shouted. Instead, I built my case like I built my life quietly, carefully, thoroughly. There was no press release, no social media post, no dramatic confrontation over dinner. Just paperwork, just facts, just receipts. I printed a fresh copy of the corrected deed and filed it into a new folder I created that day, labeled simply Restored. 6 months later, I live in a town most people have never heard of. It's tucked somewhere between pine trees and wide skies in northern Oregon. No freeway noise, no loud neighbors, no memory of a family home I was asked to forget. The house I rent is small, just 2 bedrooms, a sloped roof that whistles in the wind, and a front porch with enough space for a rocking chair and 2 pots of lavender. The landlord left behind a bird feeder, and each morning I sit by the window with coffee and watch the chickadees land like clockwork. I don't miss the noise or the expectations. The inside of the house is plain but warm. Bookshelves I built myself line the walls full of paperbacks I've collected over the years. A receipt still sits in the drawer for the first couch I bought after the settlement was finalized. I remember the feel of the upholstery when I first sat down, still in my work clothes, still unsure whether I deserved the calm. I do. In the evenings, I tend the backyard garden. It's not much yet, just a few rows of herbs, 2 tomato plants, and some wild mint that refuses to stay in its place, but it's mine. I spend more time outside now. Digging in the dirt gives me a kind of peace I never found in spreadsheets or documents. Here, the rules are simple: water, light, patience. There are no hidden signatures in a garden. 2 weeks ago, I was invited to speak at the local high school. Their economics teacher had heard about my background through a mutual contact and thought I might have something useful to share. I almost declined, but something in me said to go. The classroom was bright and quiet, filled with students who hadn't yet learned how much the world could try to take from them. I told them about budgeting, of course, about how to track your spending and read loan terms carefully. But then I shared something more. I told them that boundaries aren't just personal, they're financial. That saying no to family isn't betrayal when you're saying yes to your own future. I didn't give names, I didn't mention the house or the legal threats, but I did say this: if you ever find yourself giving more than you can afford, just to be included, Just to be good? Pause and write it down. One day, you might need to remember that you were always enough even when others tried to make you forget. At the end of the talk, a girl with bright eyes raised her hand. She asked me if I ever reconciled with my family. I didn't flinch. No, I said not yet, but I've forgiven myself. A few students nodded, one wrote it down. Later that day, I found a thank you card slipped into the office mailbox. No name on the outside, just the school logo. Inside was a short message written in blue ink that curved slightly to the left. Thank you for saying what no one else says out loud. I started a journal called Records of Worth because I want to remember my own value. I kept that card. It sits next to my own journal by the nightstand. The same title is written in mine, too. On days when I start to feel the old pull, that whisper that says, maybe I should have stayed quiet, maybe I should have taken the money and played along, I reread those words, and I remember why I walked away. I didn't walk away to prove a point. I walked away to build something better. Now I take slow walks home in the rain, my coat pulled tight and the sky a quiet gray above me. The streets are mostly empty at night except for the warm glow of a few porch lights and the occasional cat darting under fences. No one here knows my history. No one expects anything from me except kindness and maybe a smile when I pass. And I offer those things freely because they cost me nothing. There are no more urgent calls, no requests for wiring money, no guilt wrapped in sweetness, just silence, the kind that fills a room, not the kind that chokes it. Freedom, I've learned, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the choice to close the laptop, put the phone on the windowsill, and stretch out on a couch. You bought yourself. It's having receipts not as armor, but as reminders. Reminders that you kept going, that you didn't need permission to start over. People sometimes think the greatest revenge is success, the loud kind, the kind that stuns the ones who hurt you. But I've come to believe that the truest form of power is peace. No fireworks, no headlines, just a life that finally fits. And every morning when the chickadees land at the feeder and the sun catches the steam off my coffee, I whisper to no one in particular, "This is mine, all of it." If you've ever been told to keep the peace, to be the bigger person, to stay quiet for the sake of family, then maybe this story is yours too. I used to believe loyalty meant endurance, that if you held your breath long enough, the people you loved would notice your silence and come back for you. I thought being dependable would one day earn me a seat at the table, that the sacrifices would speak for themselves. But silence doesn't guarantee understanding, and loyalty when handed to the wrong people isn't noble. It's currency they will spend until you're empty. For years, I was the one who never asked for much, the one who always showed up, covered the bill, filled in the gaps, and in return, I wasn't seen. I was used. People assume betrayal is loud, that it comes with shouting and doors slamming and clear, unforgettable fights. But in my case, it came in gentle phrases like, "You're the strong one, and we didn't think we had to ask." It came in paperwork, quietly altered, decisions made without me, money taken under the soft disguise of need. They called it family, I call it theft. There's this idea we carry, especially when we're raised to be good daughters, that keeping records is petty, that remembering what you gave makes you resentful. But I've learned the opposite is true. Documentation isn't about revenge, it's about clarity. Keeping the receipts, the literal and emotional ones, helped me see the story for what it was. It helped me remember the years I paid for more than just bills. I paid with time, trust, hope. Every transfer I made, every favor I was told to just do, every time I said, "It's okay," when it really wasn't. It was all there in the paper trail. When I look back, what I regret isn't the money. It's that I waited so long for permission to protect myself. I used to imagine my future self standing in a better life, looking back at the wreckage and wondering if the cost of walking away was too high, if I could have salvaged more, if I could have stayed just long enough to change their minds. Now I know better. You can't reason with people who benefit from misunderstanding you. There's a difference between forgiveness and access. I forgave them. Quietly, fully. I don't lie awake anymore thinking about what they did, but that doesn't mean I let them back in. Some doors close not because you slam them, but because you finally stop holding them open. These days, I don't carry the same heaviness. I don't rehearse explanations in my head. I don't brace for a phone call or wonder if a text will undo all my progress. I don't wake up trying to prove I deserve basic respect. And no, they never apologized. They never wrote a letter, never called to say they were sorry. And that used to sting because we're told apologies mean closure. But the truth is, you don't need their apology to write your ending. Closure is a choice you make for yourself. It's choosing peace over proof. It's saying, this happened, it mattered, and now it's over. A few weeks ago, I printed a final document, just one page, the corrected deed with my name restored. In the top corner in small type, it read, Final Confirmation. I filed it into a folder locked to the cabinet and realized it was now empty. Every file that once held the weight of betrayal had served its purpose. I didn't throw the papers away, I just don't need to look at them anymore. Instead, I labeled 3 new folders, one for home, one for travel, and one simply called Rest. Because that's what I have now. Rest in the way my shoulders no longer carry the need to fix everything. Rest in the way my voice doesn't tremble when I say no. Rest in knowing I protected what was mine, not out of fear, but out of respect for myself. People sometimes ask if I'll ever reconcile, if I'd let them back in if they changed. And I say, honestly, I don't know. But that's no longer the question that guides me. What matters more is this. I no longer believe the version of family where love has to hurt first, where giving is proof you're worthy, where being useful is mistaken for being valued. I've learned that some relationships are only strong when you're silent, when you start speaking, when you start keeping records, when you start saying no. That's when the truth shows itself. And when it did, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue, I just submitted the proof and walked away. Sometimes I imagine my younger self standing beside me now, quiet, uncertain, holding all those invisible weights. I'd hand her the key to that locked cabinet and say, You did everything you could, and that's enough. I've come to believe that survival isn't just about leaving, it's about refusing to be rewritten. When people ask me if it was worth it, everything I lost, everything I walked away from, I always answer the same way. Yes. Because I kept the receipts, and now I don't owe anyone anything. Not even a goodbye. This was the story of a woman who was written out of her own family's narrative not with cruelty, but with quiet, repeated erasure. Haley didn't fight with raised voices. She chose a different kind of strength, the kind built on self-respect documentation and stillness that spoke louder than rage. Through silence, she protected her truth. Through proof, she reclaimed what was hers. And in the end, she found peace not through revenge, but by choosing herself. This is a reminder that your worth does not depend on who notices you. Sometimes being unseen simply means you're not where your light is meant to shine. If this story moved you or reminded you of your own quiet victories, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments and follow for more stories about strength, clarity, and the power of standing alone without apology.